In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. I want to talk now about this story we're talking about in this political segment here. Andrew Gillum, of course, who came very close to being elected the governor of Florida, did an interview that aired today with Tamron Hall, where he talked about the incident that took place a few months ago, where he was discovered sprawled out in a Miami hotel room, where he was passed out in his own vomit. This is what he had to say to Tamron Hall.
And to be very honest with you, when you didn't ask the question, you put it out there, is whether or not I identify as gay. And the answer is I don't identify as gay, but I do identify as bisexual. And that is something that I have never shared publicly before.
In his interview, he talked about, of course, dealing with alcoholism, going to rehab. He talked about, of course, what he had been dealing with. His wife said that she knew about his sexuality before they got married. When he was asked what was his intentions when he went into that hotel room with that white gay male escort, he did not answer the question from Tamron Hall. He said he had blacked out, don't recall what took place in those 3 hours. This obviously is one of those very difficult stories for anybody, Avis, to come out and have a conversation with. The question is, does Andrew Gillum have a political future after his revelations today?
You know, I actually think that he does. I think that he had to do this in order to create a path, at least, to potentially having a political future. He could not have let what happened just stand without any sort of discussion, without any sort of, in essence, come to Jesus moment, without really answering the questions that he answered in that interview. I do think also that this is a different moment in time that we live in. We just had an openly gay man run a very, very good campaign in the presidential primaries recently. We've just had a gay black man elected essentially to Congress, and so it is a new day. It is a different moment. He has a long future ahead of him. He's a young man right now, but at this moment, since he has admitted to what has happened, he has time, if that is his choice, to in some way in the future get back into politics. He has time to begin to sort of make those steps in that direction. But this is that first step that he literally had to take in order to start down that path. What we see in the future, we don't know, but at least I believe he has started in that direction to create the future for him that otherwise he would have had no chance at pursuing.
Mustafa.
Yeah, he cleared the slate. You know, it's also a chance for this country to get it right. And I believe Avis was talking about that. No one should have to hide their sexuality. Their sexuality has absolutely nothing to do with their ability to govern. What we should be focused on is the policies that the person, focuses on and shares and is utilizing to try and make our country better. And sometimes when folks have to hide who they are, then they have to do all kinds of things. They medicate. They do a number of things to try and dull the pain of the trauma that folks go through and not being able to be their true and authentic self.
Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was certainly a powerful interview. I think it's also a moment for us as a community to reflect on why a brilliant brother like this felt as if he had to live this life and not publicly, right? As if somehow there was this part of himself that he couldn't share publicly with the world. I think, again, the question always was, is he gay or is he not gay? I think also it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation as a community of Black people, to say that even when Black men say that they are bisexual, the knee-jerk reaction is that, well, that in and of itself makes them gay. And so I think there's a few narratives that we have the opportunity to hopefully discuss. I think irrespective of your politics, I don't think that you can sit here and say that we are a society better off without Andrew Gillum and people like him being able to have a voice in public discourse. And so obviously I think he was able to talk about some of the things that were on the minds of so many people, right? The fact of did his wife know, all of these other aspects that in many ways were more troubling to many of the millions of people who supported him than actually the act itself or his actual sexuality, which I think a great majority of people are really disinterested in and really just want to see somebody who they love, who they have a great deal of respect for, number one, getting the help that they need, but also number two, being able to live out their truth.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young Black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding or services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. First of all, y'all know what time it is. I haven't done this in a while, so y'all go ahead and roll it.
No charcoal grills are allowed.
Is this the crazy white people?
I'm white. I got you, huh?
Illegally selling water without a permit
On my property.
Whoa! Hey!
You don't live here.
I'm uncomfortable.
All right, y'all. White boy in London acted an ass on the subway. Check what happened.
Someone to jump it. Kick his head in. Violence! Violence!
about that EDL stuff.
EDL stuff. Roll with the EDL stuff. Oh, okay. I don't roll with the EDL stuff. Worse than them, isn't it? Yes! You're right,
Why take the shower? Why take the shower? Shouting does not make a point.
EDL stuff.
Yeah, you're lucky I have a form. I'm going to be posting it today. Trust me.
Station is back. Mind the gap between the train and the platform. Change here for the Circle District Northern.
This is my home. You're all going back. You know it as well. You know we're going back. Go on. Keep going. On the internet. I'm popular. What's your name? You know what my name is. What's your name? 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 Tell me your name. No, you're black.
You're black. But
Oh my God. Yeah.
what is black to do with anything? What is with anything?
Shut up. This is popular.
What's
This
popular?
is less than enough. Less than enough. Less than enough. Defender.
Hate. But you know what? If you're talking about me, you look at me in the eye. Howard.
Hey, she knows.
I think he's still asleep. I think he's still. Lauren, I'm telling you.
The F out.
I'm telling you, these people, they act the fool. They act the fool.
The F out.
I mean, one punch, and the brothers were like, "Say, bruh, okay, we done."
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me sort of a UK version.
Say it again, Lauren. Say it again.
I said it was a UK version of what you played the other day. I think it was in a 7-Eleven with a guy running his mouth. And he called the guy boy and said, you know, what are you going to do about it? Not a big fan of assault and violence, but, you know, it's a piece of advice that a lot of people need to understand. You can make any decision you want. You can do anything you want. You can make any decision you want. You can say what you want, but you have to be ready for the consequences of what you say and what you do. And that is, you know, with this video, with the ability to have a camera on like everything with regard to our cell phones, we're getting kind of a window into a lot of things that happen in society. But that was like a replay of what showed. I think it was about 3 shows ago with the young guy in the store.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I mean, just like Scott, you kept telling me like, oh no, this is inciting violence. No, I keep telling you.
Okay, I changed my tune now, having been through this, which is one of my favorite sections of your show. Let me just say this: I don't condone violence. I still don't, but I understand.
Yeah, I understand. Robert, they gonna learn. They gonna learn. Stop messing with people.
Well, look, you know, play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. So I think they've learned this lesson. And those black dudes, like, they were like Wakandan or something. Like, those were some, you know, some of those war dogs. So he picked the wrong ones. I mean, he probably should have figured out halfway through that soliloquy that things weren't going to end well. He probably should have got off one stop earlier. But I think part of what we have to teach in our history, because we spend so much time teaching the nonviolent parts of black history that's lulled many people into believing that throughout our entire heritage, all we did was, you know, sit and pray and sing songs and stuff. No, you had the Stono Rebellion, you had John Brown, you had the original Cassius Clay. Look up a lot of our history. and find out exactly what happened and the battles that took place, and maybe people have a different opinion when they decided to make these sorts of speeches in public.
All right, folks, real short break.
Yeah,
we gotta get.
so,
Hold
Roland,
up.
let me ask you a quick question.
No, I gotta go to the next break. I gotta go to the next. What? I gotta go to the next guest. I gotta go to short break. When we come back.
Do you have a right to hit somebody if they call you the N-word in public?
Yep.
Yes
or
no?
Yep. And that's your answer. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. The idiot had a conference at the White House today, all white historians, where he announced he's going to be signing an executive order creating a National Patriotic Education Commission. He took the time to slam the 1619 Project. Let's just say he was just simply talking to more white people. Listen to this fool.
Like those of Howard Zinn that try to make students ashamed of their own history. The left has warped, distorted, and defiled the American story with deceptions, falsehoods, and lies. There is no better example than the New York Times totally discredited 1619 Project. This project rewrites American history to teach our children that we were founded on the principle of oppression, not freedom. Nothing could be further from the truth. America's founding set in motion the unstoppable chain of events that abolished slavery, secured civil rights, defeated communism and fascism, and built the most fair, equal, and prosperous nation in human history.
I just love Reese, how these white folks are just crazy about a 1619 Project, as if they just made it up, as if none of that stuff happened.
I mean, we had a whole ass war to end slavery. So what is he talking about? Like, oh, our founding led to slavery being abolished. No, it actually did not. There was a war. They're fighting over these Confederate statues, so they seem to have known that there was a war. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is what it looks like when you have a fascist government, when you have a government that's all about propaganda, whether it's vaccine propaganda, whether it is propaganda about history, whether it's propaganda about science, climate change, things of that nature, what Donald Trump and the Republican Party want to create is an alternate universe that extends beyond Fox News and actually extends into the classrooms, and it extends into how we are actually teaching people about our American history, which, by the way, is already inadequate. By the way, there's already not enough information about the true nature of the way that this country was founded and the fact that we are still fighting for basic civil rights to this day. And so this is just another one of his ploys to try to create an alternate reality. Unfortunately, Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos are over the government, and they have a large degree of power to actually see that these kinds of indoctrination, alternative histories actually make it into the classrooms. And that's very scary.
Erica, this is all about appealing to whiteness. Donald Trump, Bill Barr, their whole deal, they want to appeal to white voters and attacking 1619 Project. Oh, it's distorted, it's been discredited. Actually, no, it hasn't. And guess what? They can try to run away from it all they want to. They can try to call this the 1776 Commission. Listen to y'all. 1619 happened. So did 1620, 1621, 22, 23, 24, 25, all the way up. 1863 happened. 1865 happened. The Great Compromise of 1877 happened. Jim Crow happened. Black people having their land stolen happened. The peonage system, that happened. Pig laws, that happened. Lynching, that happened. Racism during World War I, that happened. Racism during World War II, that happened. Racism during Korea, that happened. Racism during Vietnam War, that happened. I mean, we can just go on and on. I mean, here's my whole deal. If these white folks really want to have a debate, y'all, here's the deal. We're more than prepared to have it. You know why? Because we now own shit. We now own media. And here he had all these historians, not a single black historian at his so-called little commission today, little White House on history, Erica.
Yeah, why would they be? I mean, this is all about white supremacy. This is about a person whose father was arrested at a Klan rally, really living out his best years. And so if everyone is to buy into white mythology, which says that this noble Italian came across the shores and discovered America, and then fast forward to 1619, there were people that immigrated to the U.S. and labored the U.S. soil to make it the wealthiest country in the world. That is white mythology. The truth of the matter is that this country was founded on nothing less than genocide and nothing less than theft. Full stop. And so he's talking to people that want to continue to live in this world where that is really the gospel. But it's not the truth. And it is very much so an unrepentant history. And so when you think about the way that Betsy DeVos, who only came into power because, as Dr. Carr says, smiling Mike Pence casted the tie-breaking vote in the Wells and the Senate as the president of the Senate, you now see how they have joined forces in order to continue to depress and oppress Black folks, right? So particularly Black children, just coming off of the last segment that you just had there a moment ago. And so if people don't really kind of use these as smelling salts to understand that these people mean nobody any good, the goal is oligarchies in place. The goal is to have an authoritarian government ran by a white man, held down by white men. And in that direction, it doesn't matter who gets dozed over. It will be Black and brown people largely, but there will be white casualties as well. And so if people don't really come into the understanding that the media is just a tool to really telegraph the message of the apartheid state that the United States of America is headed into, I don't know what, other evidence that people need that this is really nothing more than a group of folks who will do nothing, will stop at nothing rather, to have all of the power that they actually demand.
And Greg, the whole deal with bringing up Howard Zinn and all this other nonsense. I mean, these are illiterate people. These are individuals who know nothing. These are individuals who are full of it. Stephen Miller, we know damn well Trump can't read, and so hell, he can barely even say the number 1619 1776. But again, and not only that, I have this story right here. Go to my iPad. Dallas Independent School District apologized for an assignment that asked high school students to write an essay about a modern hero and suggested Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old charged with killing 2 people during protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I mean, I have been saying to people since 2009, we're living in the age of white minority resistance, where white people are in the majority, but they have the people like, oh, no, we're losing. When they keep saying we're losing our culture, our values, what they're actually saying, Greg, is whiteness no longer dominates. What they're saying is, damn, we got to actually consider black people and consider Latinos and consider Asians and Native Americans. We now got to listen to y'all. That's all this is.
That's right, Roland. You know, and this is why everybody needs to break off some change and support Roland Martin Unfiltered, because this is your platform. This is black owned, and you can say whatever you want to whoever you want. 3 quick things. Number 1, he's not well. Something wrong with that man. You saw him laboring, going from teleprompter to teleprompter. Something wrong with him. And Howard Zinn, who died 10 years ago, could have walked in there and shook his hand. He wouldn't have known who he was talking about, which leads me to the second of the 3 points. Because this is your platform, because it is black-owned, because it is unfiltered and unvarnished, I hope you can track down Jean Guerrero, because the author of that speech, Stephen Miller, she breaks him down in hate monger. I want to watch you and Jean Guerrero have a conversation about Stephen Miller, because that is the words, as you say, that were going through his mouth as he moved his rotting body from teleprompter to teleprompter, because something is wrong with him. And the third thing is, Stephen Miller is Joseph Goebbels, the man they called the Poison Dwarf, who in 1933, when the Nazis took over in Germany, that's why Erica just laid this out. This ain't about truth. When Goebbels was appointed Minister of Propaganda in the Nazi regime in 1933, the first thing he did was ban books by Jewish authors. Yeah. Then he started putting his propaganda out, and you know finally that Goebbels had the famous quote that says, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. This ain't no arguing about the truth or a lie. This is about propaganda. He went on to say that the lie can be maintained only as long as the state can shield the people from the political, the economic, and the military implications of the lie. In other words, that's what the COVID thing is about. They just straight propaganda, and it can only be maintained as long as you can shield the people from the implications. But the people are dying now. Finally, Goebbels said the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie. And thus, by extension, the truth is the mortal enemy of the state. Understand what they are doing. Let's not waste any more time debating whether or not, or do they know, do they not know? So this is Goebbels in 33, man. This is straight propaganda. As Reese has said and as Erica said, this is straight propaganda. I would love to hear you and Jean Guerrero talk about Stephen Miller for a solid hour, hour and a half. Because if we don't get this straight, we are going to be living in that apartheid state that Erica just talked about.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. All right, folks. Today, the Joe Biden campaign dropped their new ad targeting African Americans, specifically African American men. Here is that ad.
We all know that we must fix our criminal justice system. Here is Joe Biden's plan to reform it: ending mandatory minimum sentences, ending private prisons, and end cash bail. A real plan for real change.
I believe my criminal justice reform package is as strong or stronger than anyone else, than anyone has proposed.
We will create a system that's fair and just.
And we can get there together. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
One word?
Anxious.
Anxious.
Because we see what this president is currently doing. We've got 170,000 Americans dead because of COVID. There's this lack of trust.
This country is starving for good leadership right now.
Big thing that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can do is just rebuild trust.
I'm not going to agree with everything that anyone says. My wife will tell you that from the beginning. But who do I trust my children's future to? I trust Joe Biden more than anyone else.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
But they've got the experience.
I'm still in shock 3 or 4 years later that we're in this position now.
November can't come fast enough because there are families that need help now.
There is no good reason, if you are able to vote, not to vote.
We need to, right? We need to have individuals that are in office like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Good governance makes a difference.
To the thousands who did not vote, we need you to show up for our future and for our country.
That's right. You cannot sit on the sidelines. You got to get in the game.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
But they've got the experience.
I'm still in shock 3 or 4 years later that we're in this position now. Our democracy is at a pivotal point.
From the top, we don't trust our government. We see the trouble we're in economically. We've got 170,000 Americans dead, and yet this president will do anything he can to make it seem like things are better than they are.
I did more for the black community than anybody with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln.
It's our responsibility. If we don't lead that effort to make things better, we can't ask other people to do it. There is no good reason not to vote.
Right, we need to have individuals that are in office like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
They are our best shot to take us forward.
And that's what makes me incredibly hopeful, but we really do have to work for this thing.
To the thousands who did not vote, we need you to show up for our future and for our country.
You cannot sit on the sidelines. You got to get in the game.
Let's go to our panel here. Mustafa, what do you make of those particular ads?
I think they're effective because they're talking about real world issues that people care about. And they also have been shot in locations where most folks spend, a considerable amount of time. It really resonated with me when the brother was saying that, he actually would trust his child's future in the hands of Joe Biden. So that says a lot because, brothers and sisters, love their children. And for someone to say that they would actually trust an individual with that child's future, that says a lot.
Avis, obviously Joe Biden and Democrats are looking at numbers. There was a 9-point gap between black men and black women when Obama ran against Romney in 2012. That went to a 13-point gap in 2016 with Trump and Clinton. the White House, they actually believe they can get as much as 20% of black men voting for them in this election. Democrats have spent a lot of time talking about the power of black women voters. I've heard black men who said that they felt that they were being ignored by the Democratic Party. And Trump, you saw all the black men who were speaking at the Republican National Convention. That's who they're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is, I would argue, the swing vote within the black vote. And what impressed me most was that this just wasn't one token ad. You ran several ads back to back, and all specifically targeting this very important constituency. The one that I personally liked the best was the one that laid out a piece of Biden's criminal justice plan. You know, one of the things that frustrates me the most from hearing a lot of rappers talk about we need a certain agenda, and a lot of the things on the certain agenda that they are threatening to hold the black vote hostage for are actually already on the Biden agenda. It really shows you the degree to which most people don't even know what's on the Biden's agenda, particularly as it relates to the black community. And so I was very happy to see that they are beginning to specifically articulate some of their policy choices, because that is what people need to hear. I think you can definitely encourage and talk to people about the importance of voting all day long, and you certainly should. But people are very practical and want to hear the bread and butter issues and how their lives will be changed once you get in office. And you can only start to really unravel that with a great deal of depth when you speak specifically about how your policy stances contrast with what's happening right now. And I think they were going definitely in the right direction with that particular ad. And I hope they produce others that address other issues that are particularly important to the black community as well.
Samuel Jackson is getting involved in this election as well. He is pushing folks to go to headcount.org to check their voter registration and register to vote. He also has a special tutorial there. I'm going to see that play it in just 1 second here. Sam is hilarious with his videos, but again, you're seeing an increasing number of people out here who are really pushing this whole idea of getting out to vote. And not only that, he shared this here. He wants 2,500 people. He said, if 2,500 of you click a voting action below to make sure you're good to vote, I will teach you to swear in 15 different languages. So watch this video. Watch this video here from Samuel L. Jackson.
Listen up. If 2,500 of you head to my head count link to make sure you're hashtag good to vote, I will teach you to swear in 15 different languages. Listen up. If 2,500 of you head to my head count link to make sure
you got to do what you got to do. You got to do what you got to do, Joseph.
I think, to me, the one thing that I think will come out of 2020, irrespective of the outcome, is that I think there's a new generation of people of color who finally realize that they got to get off the couch and get in the game. And I think that we've seen that across the generations. I think we're seeing that in the various subsets of demographic groups, specifically to the ads that were put out by Joe Biden. I think that there are obviously some good things. It's good to see that they're actually targeting black voters, but I think in some ways they might have played it a little bit too safe, or perhaps directly into the hands of President Trump. I think that obviously those ads are trying to shore up the base. But if you're talking about the swing constituency within black people, that being black males, we didn't really see much talking about jobs and the African Americans that had jobs underneath President Trump, the increase in actual wages underneath President Trump, whether people want to dispute those or not. We didn't have anything really addressing the fact that obviously, yes, President Trump did pass the First Step Act, and the likely comeback from Republican strategists all of tomorrow will be that if Joe Biden cared so much about justice reform, he had 40 years to do something. And so, I think those are going to be the type of counter punches that we see. I think overall, it will be up to most black people to decide for themselves who they think is going to have the policies that are the best for them moving forward. I think the overwhelming majority of black people have already decided that that person is Joe Biden. And so I think if we're talking about getting that remaining constituency to make a choice, I think there are potentially some holes there in the argument that the RNC and President Trump's administration are going to seek to exploit.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In South Carolina, Jamie Harrison is in a dogfight with longtime Senator Lindsey Graham to represent that state in the United States Senate. That race is neck and neck, and Jamie Harrison joins us right now on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Jamie, it's kind of, first of all, glad to have you back.
It's good seeing you.
Go right ahead. I can't hear you. Go ahead again.
I said it's good seeing you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Now I can hear you. Sorry, that was a microphone that was open. Now I can hear you. I've been sort of laughing because your opponent, Lindsey Graham, who has done everything he could to kiss Donald Trump's butt, now he is trying to hit you on your taxes. This was a video that his folks put out a little bit earlier. Folks, play this.
I've released 11 years of my tax returns. Where are your tax returns? How did you make your money?
So, he had nothing to say about Donald Trump's taxes. Now all of a sudden he cares about taxes?
Roland, it really is funny, man. And it's sort of sad to see this man who's been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years just become so desperate. But he's seeing what we're seeing on the ground, but he's also seeing what we're seeing in the polls. He's about to lose his job. And he's trying everything that he can right now to throw at the wall in order to try to make some traction. But ultimately, it's this. This is a grassroots movement we've been building here in South Carolina for almost 2 years because we've been focused on the issues that people care about. This is a guy who said, over our dead bodies will we allow an extension of the unemployment benefits. And we have 750,000 people who have filed for unemployment here in South Carolina. This is the month where they're getting their kids ready to go back to school. So they need school supplies. They have to, 400,000 of those folks have to pay for their own health care now because they lost their health care and they're now on COBRA. And so he's just been disconnected. He's detached. And right now it's coming back to roost because the people are saying through the polls, through the fundraising, that what he's been selling for 25 plus years, they don't want it anymore.
One of the things that also that is interesting is that we've run the ad before. I mean, Lindsey Graham was extremely critical of Donald Trump in 2016. I mean, called him a quack. talked about him being a racist, saying that electing him would be the end of the Republican Party. But I don't know of anybody else who has sold their soul to Donald Trump as much as Lindsey Graham.
Well, it's shameful. It really is, because in the end of the day, the people in South Carolina want somebody with a backbone, somebody with a spine who could stand up and do what's right. And we can't count on Lindsey Graham. And many of us are disappointed. And it's partly, Roland, because we had some respect for Lindsey Graham. When John McCain was alive, we thought Lindsey Graham was one of those type of people that, even though if we didn't agree with him all the time, that at the end of the day, he would do what's in the best interest of the state and the nation, and would rise above the political fray. But what we see, that this guy is a con artist. All he wants is political power, and he will say and do anything in order to get it.
You talked about the issues that matter. What do you think is this race is going to come down to in South Carolina? Is it going to come down to health care? Is it going to come down to the economy? Is it going to come down to education? What are you emphasizing to get folks to support you over the incumbent?
All of the above. And what I just did, Roland, was about 2 weeks ago, almost 3 weeks ago, I rolled out my HOPE agenda for rural communities in South Carolina. In essence, it's a 5-part plan looking at healthcare, education, economic opportunities, infrastructure, and also it included a Farmers' Bill of Rights. Because when you look at South Carolina, she's at the top of all of the bad lists and at the bottom of all the good lists. And part of that reason is because our rural communities, and rural in South Carolina is just as diverse as urban, but our rural communities are in desperate need to be rebuilt and be revitalized. And so in this plan, we have all kinds of things. So a new game plan for historically Black colleges and universities. We create on the campuses there what I call rural centers of excellence, where we match up these communities with our HBCUs, and we allow those HBCUs to do technical assistance to those rural communities to help the mayors and the county administrators with understand grants, federal grants, and all of these different things. And so we're really, really excited about it. And it addresses an issue in an area that nobody other than Jim Clyburn has really paid much attention to for the past 20 or 30 years. And so healthcare in particular is the number one of those issues. But we're about focusing our efforts on rebuilding and revitalizing rural communities here in South Carolina. And that will lift all boats.
For years, African Americans like Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. have talked about the voting power of Black folks in South Carolina, how you have a number of African Americans who are not on the voting rolls, a number of African Americans who are not registered, who are not using their power. And so how are you really reaching those folks to get them to understand that your vote sitting at home is simply a wasted vote? And so what kind of campaign? I mean, obviously, you're going to need votes of whites in North South Carolina and others, but you're going to need a massive Black turnout if you're going to beat Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, amen to that. And we are trying our very best to do everything that we can, Roland, to get into the African American communities. Now, the coronavirus complicates things. So some of the things that we would normally do, we can't do right now. You know, all of the various gatherings or what have you. But what we are trying to do is an all of the above approach. We're focusing on voter registration like a laser. Right now, for the first time ever, we now have over 1 million people of color, and the vast majority of that, probably about 95% of that, African Americans. And they're for the first time over 1 million people of color that are registered to vote here in South Carolina. We still have large pockets, though, of unregistered Black voters. And we've been working with civic organizations, Greek organizations, the churches and all to make sure that we are reaching out to get those folks registered. We still have about 2.5, 3 weeks to get that registration up. And we're going to do everything that we can. We're on Black radio. We've saturated that. We've saturated the Black newspapers, working with barbershops and beauticians, with the Greek organizations. We have an adoptive precinct program where we are partnering with civic organizations to get out into their individual precincts in their communities. So we are taking a very, very aggressive approach to reach African-American voters here in South Carolina, to get them educated and to the polls.
Questions from my panel. I'll first start with Joseph Pignon. Joseph?
Hey, how are you? Well, obviously, thanks so much for joining us. I want to talk to you a little bit about, obviously, the issues that you're talking about in this campaign. I think, obviously, we have a political divide on some of these issues when we start talking about how do we provide health care for all people, whether that is through something like universal Medicare for all, or whether that's talking about leveraging free markets, talking about allowing people to buy health insurance across state lines. As you travel around South Carolina, obviously a very red state, what is the pushback that you're getting, and how do you try to bridge that partisan divide on issues like healthcare, on issues like justice, where I do think we do have the ability in D.C. and I think across this nation to bring people together around issues that we've been previously divided on?
Well, Joseph, a fantastic question, man. Listen, when I first started this race, I told people this. In the end of the day, this is not about Democrats versus Republicans, progressives versus conservatives, left versus right. It's about doing what's right versus what's wrong. And ultimately, we have communities here in South Carolina. South Carolina is one of 12 states where we did not expand Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act. And as a result, there are about 250,000 people in this state right now who don't have health care, but if they lived in 38 other states, they would. We've had 4 of our rural hospitals that have closed over the past few years. And if you live in those communities, it doesn't matter if you vote for me or Lindsey Graham, you vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, but if you have a heart attack or a stroke or complications with diabetes, and now it takes you, instead of 10 minutes to go to the hospital, it takes you 25 or 35 or 45 minutes. That's a death sentence. And again, it doesn't matter whether you have a D or an R behind your name. That's just the reality of the situation. And so what I am doing on this race is not talking about, which is the fancy bill in Washington, D.C. that one party is supporting over other. I'm saying, how do we keep our rural hospitals open? How do we make sure that just a few years ago here in South Carolina, 14 of our 46 counties had no OBGYNs. Think about that. You are in a county and there is no OBGYN and you're having a baby. What do? What if you don't have the transportation to go to another county? These are the practical bread and butter issues that people, Democrats, Republicans, and independents are dealing with. And we've had a senator who's been in Washington for 25 years and he hadn't done a thing about it. And so that's what I'm focused on. And by focusing on that, that's why we're making the traction right now with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And that's why Lindsey Graham's unhinged at this point in time.
Mustafa.
Jamie, good to see you.
Good to see
I know
you, brother.
You too, brother. There's a small percentage of African-American men who sometimes will vote Republican, and many times they say it's about jobs. Can you talk about how the new clean economy and other jobs are a part of the message that you're bringing?
Yeah, well, and that's a huge component for what we are trying to build with our rural plan. But let's back up. Even before my rural plan, let's look at the COVID situation that we're in right now. South Carolina is 50th in the nation in terms of PPP dollars for small businesses. That's Lindsey likes to talk all the time about his relationship with the president. But I'm like, dude, if all you can do is get South Carolina to be the very last state in terms of money going to our small businesses, you need to upgrade your relationship, because we need something out of that relationship that we currently aren't getting. And when you drill down even further, 90% of Black businesses, small businesses in South Carolina, were locked out of getting any of those PPP dollars coming out of that program. We have to do better. And so what we're seeing is Black barbershops and beauticians and restaurants and small stores all closing. And they can't reopen because they don't have the access to capital. They don't have the relationships with the big banks. And so we got to do better. And part of my rural plan is to do that, to make sure that we create access to capital so that these businesses, if you have an idea, you have the drive, you just don't know the know-how and the technical know-how or have the access to the capital, We are setting up a program that will allow you to do that, partnering through the historically Black colleges and universities to provide you with that technical assistance so that you can grow those opportunities. We're also setting up apprenticeship programs because we have all of these large corporations here. You have Michelin, you have Boeing and Volvo and all of these other things. Well, none of the African Americans in these communities that are surrounding these companies are actually a part of that pipeline going into those companies. So we're creating partnerships with the high schools in those communities so that there's a direct pipeline to get some of these young kids into those large corporations so that they can have good paying jobs to take care of themselves and their families. And so we're doing a lot in our program to try to bring more opportunity so that we can see close that wealth gap that we see between different ethnic groups.
Let's go to final question from Avis Jones-Weaver.
Hello there. Running statewide for the U.S. Senate is never easy for any Black candidate. But running statewide as a Black candidate who's also a Democrat in a red state, that makes it even more difficult. Yet you are running a race that is for neck and neck, it seems, with Lindsey Graham, someone who has been in the Senate for God knows how long. That said, if you were to win, if you were to pull out a victory against, Donald Trump's right-hand man here, what would that say, not just for you and the strategies that you've put in place for your campaign, but what would that say for the future of Black politics and particularly for the future of Black politics in the South?
Yeah. So I often, and we are going to win this race. As my grandma said, you got to claim it. We are going to win this race. And I have been saying from day one that this race is about closing the chapter on the old South and opening a brand new book called A New South that is bold, that is inclusive, that is diverse, where all of us are heard and our voices matter, right? That's really, really important. And so what I'm doing is I'm dispelling those myths that have been out there that, Black folks can't, you can't run statewide because you can't raise any money, or you can't beat a long entrenched incumbent like Lindsey Graham. We saw what Stacey Abrams was able to do, how close she came, and she would be the governor right now had it not been for the suppressive efforts that took place in that state. And so what I've done is taken the lessons learned from Stacey's race, taken the lessons learned from Andrew and Beto's race, and applied that to our race. So we have built up a mechanism to make sure that we're going to fight back against any suppressive activities that we see. At the same time, I want you all to understand how important this is to our history and to this region as well. This seat that I am vying for was the seat of John C. Calhoun. This seat was the seat of a man called Pitchfork Ben Tillman, who would go to the floor of the United States Senate and talk about the joy of lynching of Black folks. This was the seat of Strom Thurmond. And currently, this is a seat that Lindsey Graham occupied. South Carolina, the very first state that seceded from the Union because of the issue of slavery, and let's call it like it is, will become, when I win this race on November 3rd, the very first state to have 2 African-American senators serving at the very same time. And so this seat is so important. It's important because it is the next chapter of how we evolve and move forward. And so that's why I ask everybody, if you want to be a part of this, you want to be a part of history, go to jamieharrison.com, be a part of our movement, volunteer, make phone calls, send postcards, make a contribution. All of those things are important because we can really close the chapter on the old and start a whole brand new chapter or a brand new book when we win on November 3rd.
All right, Jamie Harrison, we certainly appreciate it, man. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, Roland. Take care, bud.
Good luck. All right, folks, back to that Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. All right, folks. Representative John DeBerry Jr. had always represented his Memphis State House District in Tennessee as a Democrat. We don't have him yet. All right, folks. I thought we had him as a guest. So let me just do this here. I'm going to push that story and go to this next story, and that is, you know what? We'll do this in here. Let me just do it right. I'll go ahead and do it right now. All right. So y'all let me know when he's on the phone. I'll talk with him about the panel. Again, he's represented this district, y'all, for 28 years. This year, though, he's going to be running as an independent because the Democratic Party Executive Committee decided to remove him because of his pro-life beliefs. According to the Executive Committee, one of the members was quoted as saying that, well, because he's an incumbent, those who ran against him didn't have the money necessary to run against him, and they did not believe that the people in his district fully understood that he was pro-life. Greg, you're from Tennessee. This is, I don't give a damn what your position is, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. For an executive committee to remove a duly elected official because he is pro-life, that means you are depriving the people who have voted for him of representation, of him representing them.
Yeah, Roland, we know what this is, brother. We know what this is. I mean, let's be clear. Here's a black man. He's Church of Christ minister. I got a lot of people in my family, Church of Christ. I love them. Of course, they're my people. Until people understand that we have a full range of opinions, there are a lot of people in black communities who are against a woman's right to choose to terminate a pregnancy. I won't use the language pro-life or pro-choice because those aren't correlative. If DeBerry wants to take that position, that's his position. And I'm sure, and I assume it's a position of conviction. And, DeBerry is a famous name in Tennessee politics. Lois DeBerry was in the Tennessee legislature when I was in undergrad out of Memphis. So John DeBerry is, a famous name. These Democrats need to understand that in order to have our people still vote Democrat, got to be able to accommodate that type of opinion. Now, we don't all have to agree with it. I believe it's not about my personal beliefs about whether a woman should be able to terminate pregnancy or not. My belief is the state is not the same as our personal beliefs. I don't have the right to tell another human being what to do in a situation like that. But if DeBerry wants to mix his faith and his politics, that's who he is. And the Democratic Party in Tennessee is underwater anyway. So I don't know what the hell they think they're doing by doing that to him.
Look, the reality is this here, Reese. There are pro-life Democrats. There are pro-choice Democrats. I do not believe that the issue of choice or life should be a determinant as to whether or not you run as a Democrat. And to remove this man from the position, I don't care. That is idiotic to me that that's the decision that would be made.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't agree with his political ideology in this case. However, the bottom line is that he was elected. If people did not primary him, if they chose not to run against him because he was well-funded or he was an incumbent, that's on them. I think each politician, it's incumbent upon them to run on their platform and get the votes that they need to get elected. And so I think this is kind of usurping the will of the people and trying to, impose an ideological purity test on somebody that is against what people have already voted for. So I don't agree with that. I do believe that the Democratic Party is a big tent party, even if I don't agree with everything that somebody says. And to me, I think choice, anti-choice, however, whichever language you want to use, goes beyond just a difference of an opinion, because ultimately what you do with your ideology, if that actually translates to trying to block contraception or block funding for Planned Parenthood or a number of things that go under the so-called pro-life or anti-choice banner, comes into play. But the bottom line is, if you won your election, if your constituents voted for you, then they have a right to that representation.
Representative DeBerry on the phone. I want to get him on because I think this is the kind of stuff that you got Republicans whose whole position is they don't like pro-choice Republicans. That's their take. They don't like pro-choice Republicans. But it makes no sense because all right, now we have him here. Representative DeBerry? Can you hear me, sir? All right, so
I'm here.
All right, we got you. All right, so you've been pro-life all of these years, and so all of a sudden the decision was made to remove you. How did they arrive at the conclusion that they have the power to remove you from the ballot because you're pro-life?
Well, members of my opponent's executive team are members of the executive board or made the complaint to the executive board. So folks who work for my opponent did the complaint and pushed the complaint through. And so they have the right of using a provision in the law, which has never been used in this fashion before, to disassociate themselves with me. And they removed me from the ballot after I had qualified by having members of my community sign my petition, members of my constituents. They disqualified me after the filing deadline, and so I could not run as a Democrat or a Republican.
I read this one story where one of the executive committee members said that your constituents were unsure or they did not really know about your position. Really?
They have run against me 3 consecutive elections, putting everything out there. 3 Democratic opponents have run against me, talking about my disagreement with them, with the Democratic Party on abortion and on several other issues. So there is no way that my district could be misinformed or uninformed about where I stood. And not only this, they had the audacity to say that the people in my district basically didn't have sense enough to elect their representative. They had to do it for them because they weren't informed enough to make that decision. So we talk about a bunch of folks who probably have never set foot in District 90 making a decision for District 90.
You have led the Coleman Avenue Church of Christ in Memphis for the last 20 years. And this is the position that you've taken. Now, is this the only issue they have with you? I mean, do they appreciate you voting for them on other issues, and just on this one, you just happen to be pro-life?
Well, I have stood with them on many issues that are procedural and some issues that have to do with policies. So that has never been the problem of me just being a radical against the Democratic Party. This was the fact that they have run 3 consecutive elections against me. They have run 3 strong opponents, have financed them extremely well, and I still won by anywhere between 65 and 70%. The only thing they had left was to remove me from the ballot. So they had an individual here again that was a member of the staff of my opponent file a complaint, and they voted on the complaint with 48 hours notice in a Zoom meeting in the middle of a pandemic. They removed a 13-term incumbent who has been reelected by his district on a Zoom meeting.
I'm reading this story here, and it said that the executive committee had a responsibility, quote, to confirm the legitimacy of an individual representing themselves to be a Democrat. This is quoting Kendra Lee, a 32-year-old Black Democratic activist and committee member from Memphis. She said, quote, there was never a question of morals or character. This is very much straight down the line as to your responsibilities as a Democratic elected official. So are they saying that in order for you to be a Democrat, you absolutely must be pro-choice?
Yes, they absolutely say that I must be pro-choice. And according to them, Democratic policy, somewhere along, they said, and I quote, the Democratic Party has evolved. And I'm hearing some other voices. I don't know if you can hear them.
No, we're fine.
The Democratic Party has evolved, and that I didn't evolve with it. And because this is their policy, this is their stand, I'm either pro-choice or I am not a Democrat. And it was argued during the meeting that they were shrinking the tent. The so-called all-inclusive party was excluding the one conservative Democrat in the entire state who is elected to the House of Representatives.
But
you're saying that...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So they're saying that there wasn't room in the entire legislature for one conservative Democrat.
But here's the deal, though. I wouldn't even use the phrase conservative Democrat. There are a lot of African Americans who are very liberal, who simply, because of their moral convictions and their religion, are pro-life. They don't call themselves conservative.
Oh, exactly.
Now, according to the Tennessean, other members said that you took money from a Republican-aligned political action committee, that you voted for school vouchers, and that you voted for a Republican as House Speaker in 2019.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, everybody up there votes with Republicans. There are only 25 Democrats out of 99 in the House. It takes 27 Republicans and every Democrat for a Democrat to pass a bill on the floor of the House. So everybody up there votes with Republicans. As far as the Speaker was concerned, they all caucused and called me. One of the chairs of the Democratic caucus called me, a delegation called me and said, we are all going to stand together behind the Speaker. We're going to all vote. We're going to start this year off good and in harmony. And they called me and said, we're going to vote for the Speaker. I said, are you sure about this? They said, yes, we're all going to vote for the Speaker. So I called the Speaker and asked him. And the Speaker said, oh, yes, that it was... We've already worked out our differences, and we're going to start the year off. We're going to bring in all the former speakers. The ceremony was set. On the way into the door to vote, they said, we changed our mind. I said, you did what? We changed our mind. We're going to run somebody. Now, knowing you only have 25, you can't, there is no way that you can possibly do this unless 27 or 28 or 29 Republicans vote for a Democrat for Speaker. So why would you do this, and why would you expect me to spend political capital in order to just make a show that they wanted to make on that day? And everybody up there gets money from Republicans and Democrats and whoever makes a donor, whoever gives them money. So all of that's just a bunch of hooey that they threw in there.
And the voucher issue, look, there are black people, there are Democrats who support school choice.
I had that. I was fighting for school choice before it was cool. Before the Republicans took over the legislature, I put in school choice bills. I have put in school choice bills for almost 20 years. So everybody knew where I was on vouchers, on educational scholarships, and busloads of black folks, busloads of African Americans come to Nashville every year begging for school choice, and they've just been ignored.
All right. Representative John DeBerry Jr., so you're running as an independent in November, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I'm running as an independent. That's all I had left. It was done in such a way that, as I said earlier, that the petition, that the complaint was filed after the filing deadline. So when it was filed, I could not run as a Democrat or as a Republican. The only option I had when they finished doing their vote of taking me off the ballot was to run as a write-in. That's a shot in the dark. We all know this.
Got it.
But my colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, voted for a bill and a change in the law that if an incumbent has been removed from the ballot after they have qualified, they can run as an independent.
All right. Representative DeBerry, we appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
I thank you for having me on today.
All right, folks, we did reach out to try to track down some members of the executive committee. We're going to try to get one of them on tomorrow because, Erica, I really would like to hear an explanation because I do believe it's fundamentally unfair. I don't care. Here's the deal. If you want to be pro-choice and run as a Republican, I got no issue. If you want to be pro-life, I got no issue. If you want to be pro-choice or pro-life as a Democrat, I got no issue. The voters are the ones who should decide who represents them.
Yeah, and I think one of the most surprising things to hear Representative talk about was that when he said that there are 25 members of their assembly, 25 members of the Democratic Party in that Capitol, as opposed to 99 Republicans. So they're definitely outgunned. So thinking about then some of the bills that he voted on, that definitely they had to cross the aisle because they really didn't have a choice. They're a small percentage of that entire Capitol body. And so to understand kind of where we are right now, and then that Democrats, people that carry Democrat, would actually exercise this type of coup, so to speak, is really surprising, especially given that this story was picked up on the Federalist. And so this is a story now that has been running for a few weeks on the Federalist page. This does not bode well, even though this is very much so relegated to that particular area. This does not bode well for the entire Democrat Party. I mean, because when you think about the way that this can really be teased out, to say, in fact, that Democrats are not the big tent party that they once were considered, and that they're actually moving out people who don't really fit the bill, and then that it be a black lawmaker is very troubling. So I'm really interested in finding out, although he said that he's going to be running as an independent, is there any litigation that will be involved? Interested because they did, in fact, have another person that passed away in October of last year, a state representative, who they in fact said that caucused with Republicans, that he said things that were not flattering about the Democratic Party on a hot mic, a black gentleman that passed away in October of last year.
Got it.
So I'm just wondering if it was just something that they'd experienced through him, that they said that they were just really going to cut off at the knees anyone that did not do as they all wanted them to do, so to speak.
Well, I can't wait to, again, talk to a member of the executive committee. I would love to get their perspective on this decision. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Unfiltered. They have these virtual reality headsets you see right there in the video there, folks. You can place your cell phone right in, watch the virtual reality content on Ceek.com or other 360-degree video. You can also listen to, of course, with 360-degree 4D headphones, which is great for gaming, video, audio, you name it. If you want to get either one of these, go to Ceek.com, Ceek.com, Ceek.com. Use the promo code RMVIP2020, RMVIP2020, and do so. And so we certainly appreciate them being a supporter of us right here at Roland Martin Unfiltered. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Dillard and Xavier universities are participating in COVID-19 vaccination trials. In a statement to their students, staff, and faculty, the presidents of both universities said, quote, "Our communities have been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic with harrowing consequences for the lives and health of our fellow citizens. Overcoming the virus will require the availability of vaccines effective for all peoples in our communities, especially our Black and brown neighbors." Phase 3 vaccine trials have begun across the nation, including in New Orleans. It is of the utmost importance that a significant number of Black and brown subjects participate so that the effectiveness of these vaccines be understood across the many diverse populations that comprise these United States. We, the presidents of Dillard and Xavier, are already participating in the Ochsner Medical System's current vaccine trial. As part of the study, we have received our injections and have been monitoring and reporting any symptoms and side effects. Upon our enrollment, we were fully informed and any possible risks that would exclude us from the study were disclosed. We are both well. We appeal to the students, faculty, staff, and alumni of Dillard, Xavier, and all our sibling institutions to consider participating in this trial or others being conducted. The people and communities we serve look to us as an example. Our participation in such studies will help find ways to better fight the pandemic. As presidents of HBCUs, we do recall unethical examples of medical research. We remember the Tuskegee syphilis study, which misused and caused harm to African Americans and other people of color, undermining that trust in health providers and caretakers. The letter is signed by C. Reynolds Verrett, the president of Xavier, and Walter Kimbrough, the president of Dillard University. President Kimbrough joins us right now on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Glad to have you here, sir. So first and foremost, what caused the two of you to come together and say, not only what must we participate, but we have to go public with this to get others to understand why we're doing it and encouraging our students to participate?
Yeah, thanks, Roland, for having me on. So, like most people, I've been watching the news and hearing all these stories about how we have to have more people of color in the vaccine trials to make sure they work. And so the first time I heard the stories, I was telling my wife, I said, well, I think I want to do that. But then you go on about your day and do your normal thing. And then Dr. Verrett contacted me and said, hey, I'm in this study. Are you interested? I said, yeah, I'm interested. He said, then we could probably set an example and let people know we're participating and encourage people to think about doing it. And understanding that the vast majority of people are not going to be in a trial, which is fine. But to say that we're not just telling people this is something you should think about doing, but something that we are actually participating in to lead by example. And then just say, really think about it. And it's a serious decision for people because they're, as we mentioned in the letter, people are concerned about Tuskegee and a lot of the medical just immoral practices against people of color, particularly Black folks. So we wanted to say, hey, this is still important. We're a part of it. And if it's something that you want to do, think about it. Here's the contact information. So that's the way that we try to do that.
Now, on that particular point, I mean, the reality is when we talk about these medical trials, historically, they have had low Black participation. And the reality is that has an impact on the outcomes of the drugs because the reality is that Black people and white people, Latinos, men and women respond differently to certain drugs.
Exactly. So that was part of the conversation. Actually, so today I actually went for my second injection. As a part of the study, you either get portions of the vaccine, so it's not the whole vaccine. You get portions of it or you get placebo, saline. So I have no idea which one I got. But I actually had a chance to meet the lead researcher. She's from Peru, and we had this robust conversation because I'm still learning about this. And she mentioned, like, for example, blood pressure medicine, that if they didn't have enough women in those studies, the medicine impacts women very differently. Same thing for lots of these other programs. If you have sickle cell, I have the sickle cell trait. So they want to know, how does that impact people who have sickle cell disease or have the trait? So it's very important because it's not a one size fits all. You just get a vaccine that's done and then you don't test it on anyone else. The example she gave today is that the HIV drug PrEP, one of the newer drugs has not been approved by the FDA to use on women because only 1% of the trials were done on women. And of course, women need to be able to use that drug as well in case they're having sex with someone who is positive and they don't know. So those are some of the things that is very important. So the more I learn about it, I understand the fears, but I'm realizing more that you have to have a diversity of people in the studies to make sure that that drug will work for you.
It's interesting because there was someone who was on social media and they were saying, well, is he going to take the drug when it comes to take Trump's drug when it comes out? And I responded, and the person said, well, are you going to take it? I said, no, I'm going to do what I do, which is be a reporter, and I'm going to have Walter Kimbrough and the President Xavier on my show to actually walk people through this and explain this. And I get people who are saying this is Trump's vaccine, but the reality is more black people have been dying from this than anybody else. And the reality is we have to have a vaccine when it comes to this if we're going to try to get back to normal, if you want to call that, in the future, which also means that black people have to be participants in this. You just described the HIV drug. Bottom line is this: if you don't have people participating, you don't know how that drug impacts different people who are on different medicines.
Right, exactly. I mean, you think about it. Who are the frontline workers? The frontline workers are black folks. So I am not a frontline worker. I'm blessed to be able to have a job where I can do it from a distance. So for me, if this was something small that I could do to say, well, let me help and participate this way, because I know I wrote in a piece, I was saying, we had a pipe that burst out in front of our house a couple of weeks ago. And I saw this group of 10 black men from the city working out in front in close quarters for 5 hours with no PPE. So, I mean, those are the things that then it leads to a group, African Americans, who are disproportionately getting and dying from this disease because we have more of the comorbidities. So that becomes a problem. I was reading an article yesterday from New York Times that talked about how, you're going to have this greater disparity in terms of education. So our kids need to be in school. They're not in school. They're going to have the worst outcomes for that. So somebody's got to step up and say, yes, I'll volunteer to participate. If people don't want to, which I kept telling people by the letter says consider. It doesn't say you have to, you must, you should. It just says think about it. And so some of us have to think about it because we are disproportionately impacted.
But you also take on head on this whole issue of the past, and that is whether you're talking about Tuskegee, whether you're talking about Henrietta Lacks, whether you're talking about, any number of things that have happened to African Americans. And there are people today. Look, there's a reason why a lot of black men won't even go to the doctor. They'll bring up Tuskegee. But that's also one of the reasons why black women actually get breast cancer at a lower rate than white women, but die faster. Same thing when it comes to African Americans, when it comes to other diseases. And the reality is we are being impacted by these health crises, and we have to be participants when it comes to these trials.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just think about it recently. We all mourned the tragic death of Chadwick Boseman, prostate cancer, which is, really increasing in black men. We're disproportionately impacted. But then if you read the studies, when they're doing the oncology research, who's not participating in the studies? Black men. So, I mean, we understand all that. And I talked with the lead researcher today, and she says one of the outcomes of Tuskegee is that they really did increase the levels of controls for those kinds of studies, for those kinds of things that never happen again. And that's important. And that doesn't mean we aren't vigilant. We need to be vigilant to make sure that black folks aren't being mistreated as a part of these studies. But we still have to participate because there are diseases that impact us differently. Lupus impacts Black women very differently. You can't to help learn how to treat, lupus using just all white women. So it's the same kind of thing that we've got to, we understand that, but we have to move forward to address these issues that are killing us in real time.
What has been the response from students, faculty, and staff? Have you had resistance? Have you had people who bring those things up and say, you got to be crazy to participate?
Yeah, some. I mean, but most of, particularly, folks on social media, you know how it is. Folks that don't know anything about you are just calling you everything but a child of God, saying you taking some money. They must think I'm, Falwell Jr. getting some money out of it. It's like, no, this is just something I thought I could do that would be helpful. And to be an example for people that this is something very important to do. I've heard from a couple of students who are thinking about participating, and I think that that's good. But, people sometimes think college presidents, you tell people to do something or you suggest they do something, they do it. And I wish I had that kind of magic, but I don't. So I think there's a level of ambivalence. But I think most of the, vitriol that I get from this has been from people outside of the community who don't know me. But it was simply one letter, we put it out, and then I go on. It's not something we're harping on. But when I have a chance to do interviews like this, it is a chance to raise awareness. And as a university, we should be raising awareness and doing some education. So as long as we're having these conversations, whether people participate or not, it's fine. We need to have conversations like this because this won't be the only disease that we're going to have to be involved in trials. And there are diseases now that disproportionately impact Black folks that we are not participating in. So hopefully that's going to be a good outcome.
Have you also conveyed to NIH, National Institutes of Health, and others who are leading this? And this is also why part of the problem is that they also don't do advertising outreach to Black media. And then having their experts on walking people through these things, because this is not the first time that this has come up. There have been other examples where things have taken place where folks did not bring up, folks did not have participation, and the thing is, a lot of Black folks had no idea. And so when you don't reach out to African Americans, when you're not frankly communicating or advertising that you need Black participants, this is what happens. Look, the average Black person walking around has no idea where in the hell I go to apply for a clinical trial.
Right. No, exactly. And I think what's happening as a part of this is that you're starting to see some of those major agencies start to do some funding. The presidents of the 4 HBCU medical schools did an op-ed last week that says we're going to be involved in this work. And you've got to have trusted people who are living and working in these communities to do this kind of work. So the medical community, I think, has been negligent in the past. We haven't worked with Black media. We haven't worked with established Black pillar organizations to try to address these issues. And so I think with the severity of the COVID crisis, and I think we're now getting more Black researchers involved. I mean, the president of Meharry Medical College is an immunologist. He studies these things. He's able to speak to it at a level that someone like me can't speak to. But I think it's very important to have those voices. And so they're getting out there and having these conversations. So hopefully this is a learning curve for everybody to say we just can't, which I think as Black folks, we have to demand that, we get the same kind of information so that we can make good decisions to help take care of our health. So I think you're exactly right. All
right, Dillard University President Walter Kimbrough. Always good to see Alpha's always leading. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you so very much, sir. Thanks a lot. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young Black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Let's talk about what's happening out in California. Just massive fires taking place all across the West Coast, not just in California, but also what is happening in the state of Washington and others. 35 people have died. Homes been, whole neighborhoods destroyed, and the West Coast covered in smoke, folks. Democratic-led states and Donald Trump have clashed over the role of climate change ahead of his visit today to California. Check this out.
We broke a world record in the Death Valley, 130 degrees, but even in greater LA, 120 plus degrees. And we're seeing this warming trend make our summers warmer, but also our winters warmer as well. So I think one area of mutual agreement and priority is vegetation management. But I think we want to work with you to really recognize the changing climate and what it means to our forests and actually work together with that science. That science is going to be key, because if we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation management, we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
Okay, it'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Well, I don't think science knows, actually. Tom?
The sheer stupidity, folks. California, Oregon, and Washington State, they have seen historic wildfires that have burned faster and farther than ever before. Numerous studies in recent years have linked bigger wildfires in the U.S. to global warming from the burning of coal, oil, and gas. The Trump administration has blamed poor forest management for the flames. This, folks, to understand what this looked like, this was a drone video that was shot in San Francisco last week. I swear this was that Red Sun movie that Arnold Schwarzenegger was in. Watch this. Mustafa, that wasn't doctored video. That wasn't color corrected. I mean, that was actually what it looked like. I mean, how stupid can Donald Trump be to sit there? Well, I don't think the scientists know. You damn sure don't know.
The scientists know for sure. The National Climate Assessment, the IPCC report, which are all some of the top scientists from around the world, have told us exactly what we are seeing now is what was going to happen. So Trump knows because he has that information. Trump's denial is costing people their lives. And that's the most seriousness of this conversation. When you see those orange skies in the daytime, that was a picture in the daytime. Right now on the West Coast, people have the worst air quality in our country in those cities than across the entire planet. In places like India and China and other places that really have very little enforcement happening around environmental laws and the things that are happening with climate change. So when he makes those statements, he's putting people's lives in danger. You know, when they said that he was actually going to go to California, I was thinking him visiting California is almost like a thief returning to the scene of the crime, because he knows by rolling back or weakening over 100 environmental protections, he is therefore putting more air pollution, warming up our planet, you know, causing temperatures to rise, creating more intensity in the droughts that are driving these wildfires, and they're stripping away people's homes and their wealth and their lives, and places as far away as some of the shots that were shown there. You know, the air pollution is so bad that those people who have these chronic medical conditions from exposures, now they're also more vulnerable to both getting COVID-19 and dying from COVID-19. So his denial continues to play out in this vicious circle of people losing their lives.
Robert, here's a tweet someone posted 2 days ago. I'm sorry, Joseph. I keep reading this story. Vancouver is covered with a blanket of hazy smoke from the forest fires in northern Washington state. Guys, go to my iPad, please. You can actually feel the smoke in your lungs and eyes when you walk outside. And you got this idiot who's sitting there like, it's no big deal. And then, it's gonna get cooler. I know you just said it was 130, but it's gonna get cooler.
Look, I think when we talk about the issue of climate change, I think President Trump and many of the old hands in the Republican Party, I call it the most bombastic iteration of our greatest hits of yesterday. And so I think when we approach the issue of climate change, I approach it mostly from a generational standpoint first, more so than the partisan standpoint. I think if you look at most of the data, most self-identified conservatives under the age of 40 believe that climate change is real and we need to do something about it. And so I think the impetus for us now is that for people who care about climate change to start voting on the issue of climate change. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen in 2020, and when we're talking about all things President Trump, for good reasons and for bad reasons. But I think that as we look for a pathway forward, there certainly has to be a way for us to coalesce around the fact that this should not be a partisan issue. This is a human issue, really an existential threat to humanity in and of itself. And so we have to start talking about what are the solutions that are going to allow us to arrive at the outcomes that we all know need to be done, which is a precipitous decrease in carbon emissions. What are going to be the energy sources that allow us to deal with the robust energy needs of a 21st century world, but at the same time still hitting those carbon reduction benchmarks? Is that putting a price on carbon? Are we talking about putting nuclear back on the table as the only major robust energy source that can be with zero carbon emissions, and dealing with that as a frank conversation? I think all of these things are part of the tools that we need to be leveraging if we're going to have a conversation. Obviously, President Trump does not want to participate in that conversation and in many ways has impeded that conversation. But I think we have to also understand that we've been headed in the wrong direction for a long time, and administration after administration and politician after politician has ignored this issue when they've had the opportunity to act because, quite frankly, unfortunately, when it comes down to election time, this is not the issue that gets tossed around the kitchen table, but perhaps we need to change that because otherwise we'll be heading nowhere fast.
Look, you're dealing with people who are beyond idiots, Avis, and there's no other way to describe Donald Trump. They have gutted the EPA, they have gutted commerce, they've gutted these agencies. They don't give a damn about air quality. It's like whatever big business wants, and that's pretty much what you're dealing with here.
It's exactly what you're dealing with. And, when I hear him say it'll get cooler, it kind of reminds me of him saying it'll just disappear. It kind of reminds me of saying, just inject yourself with bleach. I mean, here is someone who specifically not only denies science, and I believe he knows the truth. Just like Mustafa said, I believe he knows the truth just like he knew the truth about COVID, but he has a different agenda and he doesn't care. Here's the main thing that we need to realize, you all. He does not care that over 30 people have died from this fire alone. He doesn't care how many more will die. He doesn't care how many times this will happen because he doesn't perceive people in California as people he should care about. He doesn't perceive people in Washington and Oregon either, apparently, as people he should care about. And this is the problem when you have a fact-free presidency. That's why people don't trust him. That's why people don't trust a thing out of his mouth. because just like COVID, this literally is a life and death situation. And instead of taking it seriously and acting like an adult and actually listening to scientists, people who have studied this for decades to guide him in a direction that could save countless lives, he wants to be there and act cute, crack jokes, and once again, rely on idiocy rather than on facts. And that's something that none of us can really deal with if we want to be able to survive the real reality of climate change today and moving forward.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. And look, the game of whiteness is being played, Erica. Attorney General Bill Barr attacked Black Lives Matter in a speech yesterday, saying they don't really care about black lives. He also, of course, had other ridiculous things to say, even when it came to coronavirus, wearing masks, and slavery.
The rule of law is the foundation of civilization, including economic prosperity. And that's why these so-called Black Lives Matter people, now that as a proposition, who can quarrel with the proposition Black Lives Matter? But they're not interested in black lives. They're interested in props. A small number of blacks who were killed by police during conflict with police, usually less than a dozen a year, who they can use as props to achieve a much broader political agenda. But I view the question of black lives as not only keeping people alive, but also having prosperity and flourishing in their communities.
All right, now here's this idiot talking about masks and civil liberties, and he actually invoked slavery.
A national lockdown, stay-at-home orders is like house arrest. It's other than slavery, which was a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history. Putting a
Interesting,
national lockdown,
Erica. I guess he skipped over 1877 to 1970 when we talk about Jim Crow.
You know, what's amazing to me, Roland, about Bill Barr, as Dr. Carr has named him a toady, when you look at, well, he had that talk that was right across the slave bridge, the Key Bridge in Arlington, Virginia. And to hear him, first of all, say these people, we already know that he's a white ring supremacist who is very much so wedded to the ideologue of that group. So when he says these people, we get that. The other part of it is that Bill Barr is very much so on board with pushing an agenda that destabilizes our democracy and actually takes away the elements of democracy. So that is, in fact, who we're dealing with. We're not dealing with an attorney general. We're dealing with a person who's very much so who is very much said over and over again through many speeches. And here again, he said through this stage in Arlington, Virginia, that he really believes that the country should be ran by the person who is supposed to be charged with protecting us against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, and that would be the occupant of the White House. So, hearing this and hearing him compare, wearing a mask to slavery, when we think about chattel slavery and how it affects and still affects us as Black Americans, and thinking about the trauma that our forefathers and foremothers went through to get to this country, the dehumanization, and then think about the systemic racism that really came out of that cropped up out of that. To hear him compare wearing a mask to that, it makes more sense when we think about those people who stormed state capitals earlier in April, demanding spit out of their mouth, fermenting at police officers. Those folks at the state capitals demanding that the country be reopened. These are the people that he backs and stands with. So this is, for me, all of the more reason for people to actually gear up and get ready. I know that voting begins in Virginia tomorrow, and that's going to be for people who are participating in being able to put their ballots in a secure ballot box. But we've got other cities that are going to be coming up on in-person voting. And as Dr. Carr said, that is what I would encourage people to do. Gear up, get your PPE ready, and get ready to vote.
Greg, look, what you're dealing with here is, this is absolutely, we'll talk a little bit later about Donald Trump's joke of this commission that he announced today because he's so pissed off with the 1619 project. But this is I would dare say, this is the most overt appeal to whiteness since George Wallace. I mean, I really believe that what Donald Trump and Bill Barr and Stephen Miller and all the people are doing, that they are making an even more overt appeal to whiteness than Ronald Reagan and Lee Atwater. And that's saying a lot.
I would agree with you, Roland. I would say even more so in some ways than George Wallace.
Herbert Hoover, the Lily White faction of the Republican Party. Right.
That's right. That's right. In fact, you're right, Roland. See, you teaching tonight, brother. That's when the GOP really began to turn toward this white nationalism. It wasn't Barry Goldwater in '64. It's really Herbert Hoover, as you say, with the Lily White Republican. Well, Hoover is a representative of that, but that Lily White Republicanism, where they make the decision in the first quarter of the 20th century, really the first third, right, around the Great Depression, to go for white voters and ignore the Black ones. And of course, it takes a long time to deteriorate by the time you get to Goldwater in the 60s. And then eventually Nixon, even Jackie Robinson, who was, a Republican, said, I can't, you people are racist. I mean, so that's exactly right. I love Bill Barr, though. Love his daddy, who was in the OSS. In other words, his father cut his eye teeth in Donald Barr in this idea of surveillance and state power and state authority, even though his father was a headmaster at a school there in New York. The reason I love Bill Barr is because he's not pretending anymore. You saw him waddle in his seat a little bit when he started getting a little comfortable. He waddled in there and then he said, the thing these people in their neighborhoods. Man, I don't give a damn what you think about me. See, you've made a mistake. You and your little friend, Stephen Miller, and your other buddy, Donald Trump, and Smiling Mike Pence. Here's the mistake you've made. You assume because we live in the same country, we share the same values. They've overplayed their hand by dropping all pretenses. They are determined to ride this white nationalist terror ride until the wheels fall off. But here's the mistake they made. They think that the lug nuts on those wheels are a lot tighter than they are, in fact. And this is why we have to break their political backs. This is not the time to quibble over whether Harris and Biden are the perfect candidates. No, this is the time to recognize that you've got a Klansman sitting on a stage talking about you as if you're not part of his country, because you are not part of his country in their neighborhoods. What the hell is this? What are we still got restrictive covenants in the he's not the Attorney General of the United States. He's a thug waddling toady for a white nationalist who's president of the United States, and he has committed to one thing and one thing only for the last 6 months and leading up for the next few days, the re-election of his man, so they can really show you what they're about. If you don't vote, we're going to see what it is in a minute, because this man right here is a white nationalist terrorist.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Unfiltered. They have these virtual reality headsets you see right there in the video there, folks. You can place your cell phone right in, watch the virtual reality content on Ceek.com or other 360-degree video. You can also listen to, of course, with 360-degree 4D headphones, which is great for gaming, video, audio, you name it. If you want to get either one of these, go to Ceek.com, Ceek.com, Ceek.com. Use the promo code RMVIP2020, RMVIP2020, and do so. And so we certainly appreciate them being a supporter of us right here at Roland Martin Unfiltered.